Welcome to Renolda Church. We are one church meeting in multiple locations across the Triad. Please take just a moment to fill out the Connect card you received when you arrived and let us know how we can pray for you this week. Step into a season of inspiration and growth by joining us for the upcoming fall launch of Awakenings. Women, you are invited to experience the extraordinary community of Awakenings where women come together for worship, biblical teaching, and enriching friendships. Embrace the excitement of our new series, This Girl is on Fire, Living in the Presence and Power of the Spirit. If you are seeking a deeper connection in your Christian journey and the empowerment of God's Spirit, this series is tailor-made just for you. Secure your spot by registering today using the links provided below. We cannot wait to embark on this journey of transformation with you. Get ready to be part of an epic event like no other. One great morning. On September 24th at 10 a.m., we're calling all members from our various campuses to come together as one vibrant, united community at the Benton Convention Center in the heart of Winston-Salem. This event kicks off at 10 o'clock sharp and promises to be a moment of unparalleled unity and celebration. We invite you to be a part of this historic gathering where we'll collectively envision the future, embrace fellowship, and ignite the spirit of our dynamic church. Mark it on your calendar, set your sights on one great morning, and let's make history together. Again, welcome to Renolda Church. Let's worship together.
When was the last time, Renolda Church, that I asked you to drop everything and everybody, you got to do this? And not many times in my 27 years have I said, I absolutely need to ask you to do this. In fact, if you don't come to one event this whole year, I say come to this one. Mark your calendar. It's going to be here soon, September 24. We're going to have one great morning. I'm talking about everybody from King, everybody from Clemens, everybody from Kernersville, everybody from Winston-Salem meeting at the Benton Convention Center in downtown Winston-Salem. It's going to be easy to park. It's going to be easy to get to. I know that it's a little further drive. I know that, but this is going to be one of the most special events that we've ever held as a church. All together, we're one church with one great voice of praise. And we're going to be praying about the vision for the future and great stuff for kids and fellowship activities. It all starts at 10 o'clock, September 24th. I need you to come. It won't be the same without you. It's going to be one great morning.
Today's scripture reading comes from Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 21. I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Verse 14. Bless those that persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. 17. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Verse 20. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For so by doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Are you ready for some good news? Among all the ways followers of Jesus are called to live like Jesus, none of them are as difficult as forgiving and moving past ways that we've been hurt. But there's good news for the followers of Jesus. It is the following of Jesus that actually makes forgiveness possible. The beginning of my 6th grade year started in some very peculiar ways. You know, that's a big deal in the life of a growing up kid, transition from elementary school from 5th grade to being in the 6th grade. But about 2 days before the first day of school, I started to notice that my throat was scratchy. The next day, it was more than scratchy. It was now angry. And by the time the first day of school arrived, I had full-on strep throat. And you can't send a kid to school, even if it's the first day of 6th grade, with strep throat. So I missed the first couple days of school. When I got there, I noticed that every kid, it appeared, had over the summer bought Reebok pumps. Now, I don't know if you know what a Reebok pump is, but in the mid-'90s and in the early '90s, Dee Brown, who was a basketball player for the Boston Celtics, had made these very famous because they were a shoe that you could reach down and pump a little place on the tongue. And when you did that, it would allow you to put air around your ankle and foot. And all of us, because he wore those to win the NBA dunk contest, all of us became convinced that that must be the secret to being able to dunk. Now, there was zero chance that Tim Lawson, my dad, was paying $150 for tennis shoes. So I did not have Reebok pumps, but it sure did feel like every other kid did. At the same time as me being late, missing the kind of initial culmination of friend groups and lunch tables and every kid having cool shoes, and here I am just wearing plain old Nikes. Some other things happened that made those weeks at the beginning of the year strange. Shane, whose last name I won't tell you, was a great kid, smart kid. But in the first couple of weeks of school, he was sitting at his desk one day, and he slammed his arm down, but instead of hitting his forearm to respond in laughter to something that was happening, he hit his elbow. And when Shane hit his elbow, he passed out completely in class. And when he passed out completely in class, he also peed on himself. 6th grade, terrible way to start it. Jeremy, another kid in our class, thought it would be a great idea to take a paperclip and stick it into an outlet. The next day after the shock, he came back and his entire hand had turned brown. All of these things are happening at the beginning of 6th grade. But the most devastating thing probably happened to me. We were on the merry-go-round the beginning of school, and we're going as fast as we can, and we're using this very strong kid named Curtis to get it going very strong, and we're all very fast. We're all kind of hanging on the edge of it, and as I'm hanging on the edge, Curtis gets it going too fast, and I go flying off of the merry-go-round. As I do, one of the bars clips my leg right here and leaves an enormous bruise. You know, I think it's true that none of the toys, none of the equipment that was allowed on the playgrounds that I grew up on are even legal anymore. I think all of those things have been outlawed, but you could really get hurt on these things. I got thrown off, hit on the leg, enormous bruise here. And I think for the next 3 weeks, every time I had an opportunity to stand up or play dodgeball or run or even walk through the hallway, if I bumped into anything, it never bumped on the left side of my body. It was always on the right side of my body. Always something was hitting that bruise. It was vulnerable, and it just felt like the world knew it was vulnerable. And so that leg kept getting banged, The devil wants to take the place where you are the most vulnerable, and he just wants to keep hitting it keep banging on it. Whether that's a fear of abandonment or a fear of physical sickness or codependency or substance abuse or fear or anxiety or depression, wherever you in your journey with Jesus are the most vulnerable, it's very clear that the devil knows and he wants to poke at that place that's the most vulnerable. See, Paul has been spending his time with us this year, establishing very clearly that through the first 11 chapters, Paul, more than anyone, understands that God has, through Jesus, reestablished our vertical relationship with our Father. Our vertical relationship with our Father. Because of sin, our running away, our rejection of God's goodness, the vertical relationship between us and the Father has been restored. And this vertical restoration has horizontal implications. When that vertical relationship has been reestablished, Paul is suggesting that it's going to force us to make some decisions, to act in a particular way, to align our lives with our new nature. Vertical relationship has been restored, and it has significant horizontal implications. So as we get to verse 9 of Romans 12 today, we're going to begin to unpack what it looks like to live in light of this vertical relationship being reestablished. Paul begins by saying, let love be genuine, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Well, we're not going to be able to dive into each of these kind of proverbial phrases that Paul has here. So let's just hit some highlights, what I think of these implications that Paul is revealing to us. The use of the word genuine here is the same word we might use to say live your life unhypocritical. Unhypocritical, meaning living in light of what Jesus has done for us means that we have to live consistent with our new nature. The root of hypocrisy is actually pride. The idea that we can do it better on our own, that we know better, we do better, we say better, we act better, and that pride will eventually produce hypocrisy because we can't live to the standard that we proclaim we can. And so we end up finding an inconsistency with the way we say we're living and the way we're actually living, and that pride creates hypocrisy. Paul says here, live genuinely with one another. And then he uses the word abhor, which means to hate evil. To hate evil. See, what he's saying is here, I want you to live genuinely in light of the ways in which God has given you new birth. I want you to hate the things that are meant for your destruction, and I want you to seek what is good. He wants you to discern what is good. Evil is not a created thing. Goodness is a created thing. In the beginning, God created all of these things, and he called them good. Evil is actually the absence of the thing that God created. Good is what God created. The absence of what God created is actually what evil is. It's the absence of something. Augustine, the 4th century bishop of Hippo, says that evil is a parasite. It's not actually the thing. It's an attachment, an appendage. It's sucking the life out of the very good thing. It's a parasite. And so Paul says here, I want you to be genuine. I want you to live your life in light of the new birth that you've been given. I want you to be transparent about what God's doing in your life. Struggles and victories, joys and sorrows. And then I want you to hate the thing that's the absence of what God created you for. And I want you to discern. I want you to have the mind of Christ. I want you to seek what it means to live with the renewal of your mind in light of what God has done for you in Jesus. And then he continues, rejoice in hope, verse 12. Be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, and seek to show hospitality. My wife is among the most hospitable people I've ever met. As a matter of fact, her hospitality cost me a fortune. Anytime someone's coming over, or anytime someone's in crisis, or time someone needs something, not only does she meet the need, not only does she prepare for their arrival, not only does she think about them first, but she goes over and above to make sure that they know that she knew that they had a time of need. And it's not for her own glory or her own good. In fact, what's happening is that she is making herself uncomfortable. She is, praise God, an introvert, because the two extroverts living in my house will be very, very difficult. So she's an introvert. And because she's an introvert, she would choose to stay around the people that she knows best and trusts most. But because God has given her this gift of hospitality, she will make herself uncomfortable to do the thing that God has created her to do. That's what hospitality is. Hospitality is you taking what is yours, your time, your treasure, your talent, and using it not for the benefit of yourself, but for the benefit of others, preparing spaces and times, creating gifts and meals, thinking about other people first, and being hospitable in a way that makes yourself uncomfortable. And so what he's saying here is, be genuine, live in your new nature, rejoice in hope, be constant in prayer for the world, and contribute what is needed by making yourself uncomfortable, caring for them. Then he goes on in verse 14, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. He goes on here to talk what that might look like all the way through verse 18. There may be no practice of the Christian life that's more countercultural than the principle of blessing. The world's love language is ridicule, criticism, mockery. And the Bible models something totally different. The Bible models for the people of God, for the followers of Jesus, that not only should we want good for other people, friend and foe, family and enemy, that we should want good for them, but we should find ways in which the promises of God are for those people and then speak it over them. Meaning the culture tries to find ways in which we are not measuring up, not good enough, failing, falling, and then point those things out. Some might think they're pointing them out as a way of motivating you, that if they can point out your failure, then you'll overcome it. The truth is, it makes you ashamed and forces you to hide and run away from your failure. On the other hand, the culture is quite critical and quite mean, and it's glad to, in an effort to juxtapose your failure to the things that they hope for their own life, point out those things. So while the culture is spending all of its energy pointing out your failures, the ways that you've fallen, the ways you don't measure up, the ways that you're not good enough, the Christian life lives countercultural to that, where both friend and foe, we're finding ways in the Bible where it speaks of God's people, and it speaks of those that aren't God's people yet, but are created in the image of that God who is pursuing them and loving them and creating a destiny for them and asking them to come and respond in faith. And we find all of the ways that God speaks about the people that he created in his image, and instead of using those things to curse them, we speak God's promises over people, even the people that hate us. We're wanting good for them that is consistent with God's promises. And then when we find those things, we don't keep them to ourselves. We speak it over them. We tell them this. So what is Paul suggesting here? He's suggesting that we live in a world that's broken, and Jesus has reconciled our vertical relationship with God, but it has horizontal implications. It changes the way we live. But the problem is that there's a bunch of people that either aren't living into their new identity or aren't yet at a point in their life where they've given their life to Jesus and have access to their new identity. And because they're not either living into it or they don't have access to it, these things that we're living, moving against, they're going to come. Meaning, you're going to bless, they're going to curse. You're going to work zealously for the gospel, they're going to taunt you. You're going to sow good, they're going to sow evil. So how do we live in light of this? See, what Paul is saying is that you will experience these things. And instead of responding the way you really want to, you're going to do this. This week, I decided that my number one pet peeve is when someone is behind me at a stoplight and I have waited 1.5 seconds longer than they thought I should wait. They lay on the horn. And so this week I was driving to the grocery store and someone did that to me, and I just decided I'm going to move through this intersection as slowly as my car can possibly do it. So I'm still moving forward, fulfilling the request of their horn, but I'm going to do it as slowly as possible. So I'm on my way to the grocery store. I waited at this intersection, this red light, as it turned green. 1.5 seconds, too much for their sensitivity. They lay on the horn, and I'm just slow rolling, being as obnoxious as I can possibly be. And here we come down Miller Street. I'm getting ready to turn in to the Cloverdale Harris Teeter, and I notice that they're still behind me. And not only are they still behind me, but they have their turn signal on. They are turning in to the same shopping center as me. Now, my first thought is that they're going to get out of this car and they're going to beat me to death because, in a fight, I've only got one response: run away. And I don't know if I can run away in the shopping center parking lot. So here we go. They're pulling in. I'm going to park so far away from the place that I'm going, that I'm hoping that they're going to go to the Harris Teeter. And I'm going to park down, like 12 stores away, hoping that that's where they're not going. So I pull into this little side part of the parking lot. Like, the only reason they'd be going there is if they were going to this kind of obscure pizza place. They follow me in there. I'm like, this is about to go down. I have made the wrong person angry. I pull in, they pull in beside me. I look down at my phone. I'm like, I'm going to wait them out. Finally, I look up and they are standing next to my car looking in the window at me. And I have no other choice other than to either roll down the window or get out of the car. And so I get out of the car because I'm hoping that 6'2" will be intimidating enough that this person will not punch me in the face. I get out of the car and they say, I am so sorry I beeped the horn at you. I was trying to grab something from under the seat and my shoulder pushed it. First of all, they hadn't even noticed that I had slow rolled through that intersection as slow as you could humanly go. Second of all, they were so aghast that they would be that rude to someone unintentionally that they followed me all the way to the side parking lot in the Cloverdale Shopping Center just to apologize. And here I am judging them, trying to antagonize them, ready to fight them. And all they wanted to do was apologize for a mistake. We weren't seeing things the same way. See, Paul says these things are going to happen. There's going to be offense. There's going to be hurt. There's going to be judgment. And how you respond to it in light of what Jesus has done for you is going to have a lot to do with the way in which you live in the world. Jesus is asking you to do something differently. And in the end, the root of the ways in which we respond comes down to one key principle. It's dinner time at a family's house, and the dad is sitting down with the mom and his boys, and they're eating. And one of the things the mom had asked is, listen, it's a house full of boys, but can we just have no potty humor at the dinner table? So they're sitting there, and one of the little boys looks over to his dad. He says, hey, Dad, are bugs good to eat? And the dad says, let's not talk about that at the dinner table. And the boy said, well, Dad, just answer my question. Are bugs good to eat? He said, son, serious dad voice, we're not going to talk about that at the dinner table. So the little boy is quiet, and they finish their meal, and later the dad inquires and says, now, son, I feel like at the dinner table you were trying to ask me something important. And he said, oh, nothing. I just wanted you to know there was a bug in your soup, and I was trying to figure out whether or not it was good to eat, and you told me to be quiet, so I just let you eat the bug. See, the dad was expecting one thing, but in reality, the son was trying to tell him something altogether different. I was expecting one thing from this driver, and on the other hand, he was trying to do something altogether different. And in the end, life comes down. The way that we receive the world, I think, comes down to one root issue. It is without question true that in your life, there is always going to be a gap between the way you hope people would behave. Like in every single relationship, kids, parents, spouses, friendships, colleagues, you always have an expectation of how you want them to act. The truth is that no one ever acts the way you want them to act. There's always a gap between the way we wish people would act and the way that they actually act. The way we wish they would behave and the ways that they actually behave. There's always a gap between the ways we wish people would behave and the ways they actually behave. And the ways in which we face the things that Paul is talking about here in Romans 12 and the ways we respond come down to one fundamental question. When there is a gap between the way we wish people would behave and the ways in which people actually behave, do we assume the best about people or do we assume the worst about them? My dad, single dad, 2 boys, is faithful, disciplined, Jesus loving, basketball attending. For us 2 little boys until this very day, no one is a more steady ship than my dad. He's the best father I've ever seen. But you know what he's not good at being? God. God. My wife, hospitality loving, homeschool mom, soccer practice, basketball practice, track practice, swim practice, driving, feeding kids that don't belong to us, that show up at our house all of the time, making sure that our home for me as a pastor is a place of peace and rest, advocating for fun for our family, up for a celebration anytime it's warranted, and honestly, even when it's not warranted. She is wonderful in every way, but you know what she's terrible at? Being God. My dad's a bad God. My wife's a bad God. You know who's also a bad God? My kids. They are cute and they are smart and they love Jesus and they love church and they're great friends. But if I ever try to put my kids on a pedestal and make them my God, they will come back wanting every time because they're great at being kids. My wife is great at being a wife. My dad is the best dad, but they make terrible gods. And when we put people on a pedestal and place expectations on people, I promise you there will always be a gap between the way we wish people would behave, the way I wish my dad, my wife, my kids, my friends behave, and the way they actually behave. My wife and I have been in the same community group for what is probably almost a decade at this point. We do life with these people. They've known my son, who's a junior in high school, since he started probably elementary school. But you know why the relationships in that group work so well? You know why there are times when many of us have considered moving away, considering life changes, and one of the things that we consider is the value of these friendships. Why do we do life at such an intimate level? Is because in the end, we know one thing's true. We are broken. And so when we disappoint each other, when we don't measure up, when we don't communicate as faithfully, we have grace for each other, because when there's a gap between the way we wish we would all behave and the ways we actually behave, we can do one of two things. We can assume the worst, assume that the slow text or the short comment or the response that we weren't hoping for or the time they didn't show up, we can assume that that is the fruit of their judgment, their hatred, they just don't care enough. Or when there is a gap between the way we wish they behave and the way we actually behave, we assume the best. They love us, they care about us. They move towards us in remarkable ways. And when we disappoint each other, we assume the best because we know fundamentally how much we care for each other. In the end, if you're going to be in a relationship with people in your lives, you need to know that hurt's going to come. And when there's a gap between the way you wish they would act and the way that they actually act, whether it's friendships or parents or just people in the world, drivers behind you at a 5-way stop who accidentally push the horn, you have to assume the best. And hear me say that I am acutely aware that assuming the best about people makes you vulnerable to being hurt. Because when you assume the best about people, you pursue them, you chase them down, you pray for them, you bless them, you show hospitality towards them, and it makes you vulnerable. But the secret to the Christian life is making yourself vulnerable because Jesus made himself vulnerable for you. I used to run. Now I'm more of a fast walker on the treadmill kind of 40-year-old. But when I used to run, I was running one time in California while I was there doing some schoolwork, and I was running with my buddy, and we were running kind of through these mountains, and I noticed a groundhog over there. And I couldn't tell if the groundhog was hurt or if it was asleep or if it was just playing dead because we were there and it wanted. And everything I know about a groundhog comes from that great Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day. And so I was like, I'd like to be close to this groundhog. It feels like they're very cuddly. Maybe I could become friends with this groundhog. So I get over close to it, and my buddy notices what I'm doing, and he says, "Hey, dude, that's not a groundhog. That's a porcupine." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, that's a porcupine. You're about to cuddle up with a porcupine. Stay away from that. Welcome to California." You know, porcupines have 30,000 quills. 30,000 quills. And what happens is that when they get in the skin or in the nose of your dog, the heat of the body causes it to expand and dig in deeper. And if not dealt with quickly, it'll cause infection, and it already hurts. And I was about to dance with this porcupine. And one of the things you learn about porcupines is that they travel alone. They live in isolation. They're just quite terrible, honestly. There's some questions I have for Lord Jesus when I get there. Porcupines, why they exist, be one of them. You know, almost every animal, they've figured out a way, either Disney or Looney Tunes or these other broadcasters have figured out a way to make those heroes. I mean, after all, we have a cartoon about skunks, Pepe Le Pew. We have a whole cartoon. There ain't no cartoon about a porcupine. There's no lovable, cuddle cartoon about a porcupine. You don't go to the Disney World and go and ride the porcupine ride because they're awful. Except for every fall, the porcupine goes out looking for love. And as the porcupine goes out looking for love, he knows what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to make himself vulnerable. Meaning the part of the porcupine that we see is the 30,000 quills that in an instant will attack your dog or your cat or you if you think it's a groundhog that should be picked up and hugged. But in the fall of every year, these young porcupines, they go out They sign up for the dating app, and they're going to find them another porcupine that they can do life with for a little while. And for them to be in relationship, they have to make themselves vulnerable. There's one spot on the torso of the porcupine that is completely unprotected by the quills that provide protection for the rest of their body. And they literally do this dance as they approach other porcupines. They live their whole life in isolation, alone. But during the fall, when they go out looking for a relationship, they do the porcupine dance, and they stand up and they show their torso to suggest that they are making themselves vulnerable so they can be in a relationship. And I'm concerned that the difficulty of the world, the ways in which we have experienced the difficulty, the hardship, the disappointment, the gap between how we wish people would behave and how they actually behave, that we are spending our entire lives being porcupines, meaning doing everything we can do to push away relationship, to not be in community groups, to not do life with other people, to not have the hard conversation to reconcile family and friends. We've got up this callous exterior that says, by no means in any way am I going to be hurt again. And the truth is that the only way to be in relationship is to make yourself vulnerable, to expose the part of you that's not calloused, and to move towards people. When relationships work at their best, they do so when we respond in the opposite way that we frequently experience the world. Meaning, we sow the opposite spirit. They curse you, you bless them. They gossip about you, you build them up. They hate you, you love them. They shut the door in your face, you show extraordinary hospitality. You see what Paul's doing there? What Paul's saying is, if they hated Jesus, they'll hate you. If they rejected Jesus, they'll reject you. If they curse Jesus, they'll curse you. And so what I'm telling you is sow the opposite spirit. Don't do the thing that they expect. Sow the other thing. See, it works in our good relationships that there's a gap between the way we think people should behave and the way they actually behave. And those are the relationships that are healthy, that we're having to assume the best. But the world looks at God's church, looks at Jesus' church, looks at Jesus' people, and they expect us to act just like the world. There is also a gap between the way they think we should behave and the way that God has asked us to behave. There's a fundamental principle of sowing and reaping on this side of the cross that is irrefutable. You will reap what you sow. And when you sow the opposite spirit of blessing instead of curse, love instead of hate, hospitality instead of rejection, friendship instead of adversary, in every way, if we sow as the people of God the opposite spirit, we know from Scripture that the promise is that God will bless that, and that is what we will sow. We will catch people off guard because there's a gap between the way they think we should behave and the way we actually behave. We'll catch them off guard. And the only question they can ask is, why? And the answer to a dying and lost world is simply this: we sow the opposite seed because Jesus first did it for me. He sowed his own life into the ground when he should have sown my death into the ground. And because spirit seed produces after own kind. When Jesus sowed his life into the ground, the only thing it could reproduce was life, and life more abundantly. I want you to hear me say that the world expects everyone, not just church people, not just Jesus people, but they expect every single person to hate, to curse, to reject. And I'm saying that there's a better way, not because of who I am, but because of who Jesus is. Let's shock the world with all of the ways when there's a gap between the way they think we should behave and the ways in which we actually behave. That we sow the opposite spirit of a broke and dying world, and we show them the affection and the love and the acceptance of a Jesus who was sown into the ground and raised from the dead, so that all of our stories could be altogether different. And that's the gospel.